Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to tackle some of the allegations that Pope Pius XII didn't do enough, or in fact condoned the Nazi extermination and persecution of the Jews during World War II. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut era in principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. I'll make sure I put a banner up here of my other history-related episodes. And I think this one is very important because there's a certain generation of Americans, of Protestants, and even Catholics who actually believe that Pius XII didn't do enough or did nothing at all. And this is so far from the truth. And a lot of this, I think, stems from two works. One, there was a play done in 1962 called The Deputy. And The Deputy insinuates that Pius XII didn't do enough, or in fact was complicit. And then you saw it, I think probably even worse, played out in a book called Hitler's Pope that came out in 1999. And I think it was written by John Cromwell. And I remember this book because my father read it. And I remember seeing it in our house. And it had, at the front, it was a picture of when Pius XII was either Papal Nuncio to Munich or he was Secretary of State under Pius XI, coming out of a building, and there's swastikas out there. So you think, oh my God, he's Hitler's Pope. And my dad literally threw this book away. He just was vomiting. But I think a lot of it comes from that, and it's so far from the truth. And I want to be very clear. And again, these episodes are meant to be short, and they're not meant to be exhaustive in any way, shape, or form. There's been a lot of literature that's come out recently that's exonerated Pius XII, and not just from Catholic writers, but from Protestant writers, from secular writers. There was a recent book that came out called Pius XII and the Jews. No, it's Pius XII and the Jews from the Secret Archives or something like that, and the Vatican has opened up their secret archives. And lots of times the word secret is mistranslated from Latin. It just means like private archives. The Vatican archives. And now they've actually changed the name of the secret archives to the Apostolic Archives. Either way, so what do we know? We know the backdrop of the 1920s and 1930s was really turbulent for a couple of reasons. You saw the rise of Nazism, really first with Mussolini in Italy in the 20s, but certainly with Hitler coming to power in 1933. So in the late 20s, early 30s, you saw the rise of Nazism in Germany. And this needs to be put into context with the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, because after World War I, Germany almost became Bolshevik. There was an attempt to topple the government after World War I and in various countries. So you had this specter of Bolshevism. And Bolshevism, unlike Nazism, is openly anti-Christian. I mean, just openly anti-Christian. You can look at the platform of the Communist Manifesto by Marx 70 years earlier, and every writing of the communists is, we must destroy religion, we must destroy Christianity, we must destroy the family, destroy private property, and people must worship the state, among other things, collectivization of labor and all these things like that. So you had this gigantic specter, this Soviet Union looming over all of Europe. It's a gigantic country, of course. So during the 20s and 30s, when Nazism was rising, you saw sympathizers. You saw sympathizers in England. You think of Edward VIII, before he abdicated. And there were other sympathizers around that actually thought that Nazism, although it was troubling because of its fascistic kind of tendencies, they're like, well, it's better than the Soviet Union. So I think that needs to be put into context, in a little context. But look, the Vatican was very clear, going back to the pontificate of Pius XI, which is the pontificate after Benedict XV, so 1922 to 1939. They published many works and encyclicals saying that fascist government, they didn't use the word fascist government, that totalitarian governments were contrary to the Christian faith. So you got to understand, the church could not be openly anti-communist and anti-Nazi regimes or anti-fascist regimes, let's say, in Hitler and Mussolini in Italy, because of the terror that would come, and they would persecute the church and kill Catholics and so forth. So the Vatican and its diplomacy had to be very careful, but there's a consistent work of literature published by Pius XI stating that. Now, Pius XII, who was his Secretary of State, but prior to that was the nuncio to Munich, or a nuncio is kind of like an ambassador to Munich during the rise of Nazism, fought against Nazism as well, had communiques with the Nazis, and told them that their form of potential government is flawed and wrong and contrary to Christianity. In fact, the church had a rule that if you were part of the SS or you were part of the Nazi party, in both cases, of course, the Nazi party, but the SS would be worse, that you were automatically excommunicated, similar to Freemasonry, because the ideals of Nazism were so contrary to the Christian faith. But either way, so he was papal nuncio, and then eventually Pius XI made him Secretary of State, which is the kind of the head diplomat. And again, consistently anti-fascist. Now, when he became the Pope in 1939, this is right at the cusp of the Nazi invasion of Poland. This is right after the Nazis had annexed Austria. Not the best time to be a Pope, right? You come in and boom, World War II starts. Again, constantly decrying Nazism. And look, the Vatican, given that it had an incredibly good diplomatic corps and an intelligence corps, knew that, and look, the U.S. knew it as well. All the countries knew that they were building these camps to eliminate the Jews. And in fact, in 1939, the Nazis told the Jews, you can leave Germany. We don't want you in here, right? We don't want you, but you've got to leave your money behind and all your belongings. And so you saw a lot of Jews that were fleeing to the ports to get out of Germany. They went to Genoa, they went to Amsterdam, they went to Marseille. And in fact, you can see this played out. Netflix had a show, a very small show called Transatlantic that had Gillian Jacobs that took place at this time. And it was like this little small group of Americans trying to get Jews and other undesirables perceived by the Nazis out of Europe. And in fact, a lot of Jews were put on boats and sent to Australia and sent to different places like America and were rejected. In fact, the St. Louis is a very famous boat that was full of Jews that went to America, and FDR or somebody in the American government rejected them and said, get out, we don't want you here. So like, again, it's a shameful part of American history. I mean, put it in historical context, there was a lot of anti-Semitism during this time in the world. But either way, so when Hitler came into power, the government, the pontificate of Pius XII did its best to hide Jews in monasteries and did its best to smuggle as many as out. And more importantly, or most importantly, eventually Hitler and Mussolini were allies. They were both fascists. But when Hitler realized that Mussolini couldn't handle Italy because the Americans were invading from the underbelly, from North Africa, the Nazis actually invaded Italy and took it over in the summer of 43 and took over Rome. And the head of the Wehrmacht, or the German army, gave guarantees to the Vatican, like, we're not going to round up any of the Roman Jews. And of course, Pius XII was smart enough to know that you don't trust Nazis. He's like, we're not going to round up any Roman Jews. Oh, they're safe, they're safe, they're safe. 2 weeks later, of course, they start rounding them up in the middle of the night. And Pius XII finds out, and through great diplomacy, he was able to stop that, because up at the top of the SS was against this because they were worried that the Catholic Church was going to openly decry Nazism. And so it was Himmler who actually counter-decreed the decree of the Nazis in Rome to round up the Jews. And so, again, Pius XII saved many Roman Jews at that point. And look, no one can deny it. You look later on when Pius XII died in 1958, the leader of Israel, Golda Meir, the female prime minister of Israel, commented and had many speeches of the works that Pius XII did to save the Jews, not just in Israel, but over in Rome. You saw the lead rabbi of Rome convert to Catholicism because he was so moved by the works of Pius XII to save and to smuggle out as many Jews. And it goes through the network of the Catholic Church, During the time of World War II, when a lot of the countries that were under puppet regimes of Nazism, like the Vichy Republic, most famously over in France, but also in Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria, all these kind of puppet Nazi regimes, Pius XII would reach out through the bishops there, through the primates, and try to convince those governments to slow the deportation or not even listen to the Nazi demands to deport all the Jews to Auschwitz, Dachau, and all these concentration camps. And again, they would smuggle, they would get the Jews that were in these particular towns all through Europe, in Nazi-occupied Europe, and have them hide in Catholic households, have them hide in Catholic monasteries. And even Castle Gandolfo, which is the Pope's summer residence, because it can get hot in Rome, and it's right outside of Rome, he kept Jewish families in the Castle Gandolfo during this really peak time, 1942, 1944, after the Nazis invaded. And in fact, a lot of Jewish women named their children Eugenio. His first name is Eugenio Pacelli was Pope Pius XII's name, in honor of that. And you can see a lot of examples of this played out, that the Jewish people were very laudatory of Pius XII because he did the best that he could, given the situation that he was in, to help the Jews. And so this was pretty generally understood and received until the deputy, the play came out in 1963. And then you find out that the bankrolling of the deputy was done by the KGB, because again, at this point, Nazism is wiped out in 1945. And now the Soviet Union, of course, is the grim super specter that everybody in Europe is worried about. And the Soviet Union, through the Comintern, is trying to foment revolutions in Greece and in France and all these places to try to get little puppet communist countries set up, in addition to all the countries in Eastern Europe that they invaded after World War II. And so the KGB, of course, kind of like our CIA, their job is to manipulate and so forth. They bankrolled this play, The Deputy, which gave this idea that Pius XII and the Vatican in general did nothing to help the Jews. And then you saw Cromwell, the author, really play this up. And so because of these two things, you really find a lot of people that truly believe that the Vatican did nothing to help the Jews during World War II. And again, look, I understand. Some of it is going to be atheists. Atheists already have an axe to grind with Christianity. And of course, the Protestants are just looking for any reason to hate the Vatican and so forth. They're just looking for anything. But if you look at the history, if you look at the primary sources, not books like Hitler's Pope, if you look at the primary sources, if you look at speeches given by leading Jewish authorities, if you read the communiques, you can see that the Catholic Church under Pius XII, when he was Papal Nuncio and the Secretary of State under Pius XI, certainly when he was the Pope, they did the best that they could. And in fact, estimates are that about 700 to 900,000 Jews were saved and scurried out of Europe during World War II because of the help of the Catholic Church. And you just don't hear about this. And it's important to know it, because if you're ever talking to somebody about World War II, you might hear this trope thrown out, and you need to be able to respond to it, because it is the truth. The church did the best that they could. Not just the Pope, but little people who ran monasteries, Catholic families who were hiding Jews. They all did their best in an exceedingly difficult situation that we can't even relate to save these people. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.